let's wait until people come into the room. Can give people a minute or two before we get started. Nice to see you, Lars.
Likewise.
Nice to see you, Marcus. Nice to see you, Jakob.
Looking forward to this. It's gonna be
Yes,
fun.
me too. Super exciting. All right, we have quite a few people join the room already. So let's get going because we have a full schedule to go through today. So hi everyone. So I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. We'll be deep diving into the dynamic of innovation and regulation of urban planning, and our agenda promises an engaging exploration of insights from some of the leading experts in the industry. So our first speaker today is Jakob Steen Christensen, partner and architect at JAJA Architects. So Jakob will be talking to us about the complexities of mobility hubs spanning from large-scale urban structures to the finer details of neighborhood design and streets. Following Jakob, we have Lars Grødem-Olsen. He's an eminent mobility expert. He will discuss the pressing topic of operators shedding light on why cities should be deeply invested in understanding the role in the mobility landscape. Last but not least, we're privileged to have my colleague Marcus Lübeck today stepping in as a third speaker. So if you caught yesterday's edition of SAG Daily, you know about the groundbreaking work with Vezic in Berlin. Marcus will be sharing insights into how Vianova is instrumental in helping the city of Berlin address some of its most urgent micromobility challenges. And these insights are crucial for shaping the future of mobility, influencing decisions on new bike lanes, mitigating traffic accidents, and addressing the issue of e-scooter clutter. So these discussions are not only incredibly timely, but also vital for the ever-evolving world of mobility. So without any further ado, let's kick things off. Jakob, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will. Okay. Yes, thanks for the introduction. My name is Jakob Steen Christensen. I'm from JAJA Architects based in Copenhagen. And I'm going to talk in a little speed introduction to our work on mobility hub networks across scale. And as an introduction to our work, we usually start with the mobility pyramid that we developed with Robert Martin as a part of a PhD program here in the office. And it's basically saying that, you know, we should have all forms of mobility, but we just need to be better at prioritizing walking and biking and public transport. And once in a while, we can, of course, also take some individual flights. And it's the same way as with food, like you become what you eat, and the same thing goes for the city. So we can eat everything, but we just need to eat a good foundation of basic stuff. And basically, to give an example of the mobility pyramid in real life, this is a traditional housing street in Copenhagen. And you can see this is full of basically one kind of diet. And basically what we are trying to show is that, again, it's not either or. This is an example of where we work with the street. We divided the area in 3/3. One third is private traditional car parking. 1/3 is shared mobility, and 1/3 is public space. Also looking at the space allocation in Copenhagen, we actually use 66% of the public space is used for cars. And if you look at the modal split of how Copenhageners are actually moving, we only have 32% of cars, but of course a lot of bike trips and walking. So we basically think that it's a democratic problem, and if we want people to go towards greener forms of mobility, we also need to provide the space. So basically what we're saying is that we need to be much more ambitious on behalf of our public space. The street is the biggest connected urban space network we have in the cities. So of course we dream of doing things smarter to free up space and create quality of life in the city. And that's where the mobility hubs come in, because it's both a way to promote the services, and at the same time it's also a good way to save space. So basically, starting from the left diagram, of course, the mobility hub is already established through the public transport, and I think also in the future that the mobility hub network needs to be kind of built on the backbone of public transport. So basically, the diagram shows like a regional hub. It could be park and ride. We have fast train, tram connection, buses into the central station, and from there on, we have good connections out to the neighborhoods. And then when you come on the right side, we work with a much more decentralized street hub strategy, where you basically have modes where you can get access to micromobility, shared cars, shared bikes, etc. And I'll try and go through some of these things. So of course we have the train station that we work a lot with to promote that kind of already existing infrastructure. And maybe one thing that we are working a lot with in Copenhagen is the mobility hub in a form of a compact building. And then we have the neighborhood hubs, and then lastly, the street hubs. So this is one of our first buildings we completed in Copenhagen. It was a scary assignment to build such a big parking facility in the middle of a dense urban neighborhood. A big part of the project was, of course, to give something back to the neighborhood. So we created this activity park on top of the roof. And it's actually now the most popular public space in this neighborhood. But a big thing when we work with the mobility hubs is basically trying to utilize the fact that we have 450, in this case, parking spots in this building, and utilizing all the travelers coming in and out of that building to also introduce like a broader offer of mobility services, such as basically a lot of shared options, and it's something we work a lot with in the ground floor, where we see that it's the easiest way to introduce shared facilities. So here we have a park and ride, we have a lot of shared cars, we have also a workshop and kind of a mobility foyer to introduce to all the shared services. Oh, when we come further to the next level is basically the mobility hubs in the neighborhood. And it's usually built up around tram stops or bus stops, around plazas and streets. And basically a big part of that scale is introducing, like extending the offer. So, and in this case with micromobility for the first and last mile of the trip. Another example in Aalborg in Denmark, where we also work with, of course, extending with the cafes, with the postal services and rental of cargo bikes. And in Copenhagen, another example where it was in relation to a bus stop, in relation to a recycle station for swapping and repairing other goods. So we try to also combine basically community amenities with public transport. And lastly, the street hub. And this is, of course, a lot in the streets and that's the kind of, you could say, typology we have the most of, the smaller living streets. And this is usually the image you're met with when you're opening your front door at home. And it's depressing. So basically what we're trying to do here is to introduce shared facilities in the street, but not only with a mobility focus, but it's also trying to lift other agendas, like trying to make improve the living qualities, improve general accessibility, and of course, smart and integrated mobility services. So basically what we have tried to develop in a Copenhagen context is to to say that when we introduce these things, we try to use the main door as a kind of strategic point, because that's the most attractive parking spots right in front of the door. It's also where we should try to introduce some other qualities, such as bench, bicycle parking, and accessibility. So we basically took out 2 parking spots in this example, and we're working trying to lift a lot of agendas at the same time, and having a strategic placement of, for instance, in this case, the shared car. Because if the shared car is going to compete with the private car, which is also standing here, then we need to use the most attractive parking spots for the things we want to promote. So this is we call it the green main door. So it's a hub where you come out of the door, you have a tree, you have a bench, you have universal access to the street. And then, of course, this is a typology where we can also integrate other things. And in this example, then we have shared cars with charging facility. And this is, of course, like a very flexible structure that you can kind of array down the entire street. And then starting from a very small kind of point, you can kind of enhance the quality of the street along the entire thing. That was a super speedy kind of introduction to how we work with the mobility hubs across scale, and of course trying to, at the same time, improve the urban space. And yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Jakob. Yeah, thank you for an incredible, insightful presentation. We appreciate the value you brought to the topic of mobility hubs. I think next up we have Lars. Take the floor, please. I think you might be on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yes, hello everyone. So nice to see everyone that's here. So thankful to be here at this webinar. So I'm Lars Christian Grødem-Olsen. I run a company called Movability that aims to help public sector with implementing new urban mobility. And I'm here today to help you understand these guys here, these fascinating guys, and what are they thinking about, and why are they thinking it? And to understand that, we need to understand the key factors behind micromobility operations. And why is that important? Why are we here? And my answer to that is basically, we need to understand micromobility operators just as well as we do bus operators, train operators, or car sharing operators, to understand how are we going to implement this new mode into our cities. Because we know a lot more now. We know that micromobility actually helps cities meet their goals. So we don't need to just talk about how many of the micromobility rides actually replace the car ride and how many replace walking or public transit. We know that from an independent study that actually 5% of users in Oslo actually got rid of their car due to micromobility. So we can start having a much more informed discussion about the topic and find out how can we really integrate this into our cities in a much better way than it has been so far. However, it's not all rosy. We need to regulate, and regulation is hard because regulation can reduce demand. So the determinants of demand are availability, price, and user experience, and regulation can reduce availability through capping the amount of vehicles, for example. Price can have to be raised by operators due to expensive and costly regulations imposed by city governments. And also user experience can be reduced through, for example, very aggressive geofencing. So that's where we need to be smart about regulation. And operators can actually leave you. There's a wise man that said there's 50 ways to leave your lover. And he was true also about micromobility operators in cities. If they are unprofitable, they will likely leave you, which is why it's really important that we get this right. So I want to talk about 3 drivers behind what makes your city market attractive. So I want to show you how operators roughly prioritize markets, how your regulations affect them, both on the revenue and the cost side, and also how you should kind of approach operational tasks with a bit of caution. So just first to show you a bit about the priority that your market is in. So operators usually divide cities into 3 levels, where they call them like tier 1 city, tier 2 city, tier 3 city. And depending on what kind of amount of fleet size your city can take, your city will get a certain priority. So tier 1 cities will usually get higher priority than, of course, like a tier 3 city. And going on, it's really useful for us as cities and PTAs to understand that actually the regulations that we impose can have a drastic effect on also trips, which we want to have more trips, and it can have a drastic effect on revenue. An operator told me that Paris, actually, after it imposed mandatory parking, saw a 50% reduction in trips relative to vehicles, which is pretty significant and needs to be taken into consideration. Looking at Oslo as a market, I've gone in and analyzed what happened to the profit margins after new regulations were imposed. And interviewing operators, analyzing the business case of Oslo, I saw that what was the most profitable market, maybe in the world, in terms of EBIT margin in 2021. Basically, that margin got eaten up by the national government imposing a new insurance regulation, leading to a very expensive insurance policy for operators, as well as city fees and parking fines really just eating the rest of that profit margin up for an average operator in my analyses. Luckily, the operators were able to renegotiate and get new insurance policies so that they could see good savings and have a healthy EBIT margin in 2023. And yeah, this shows a pretty volatile everyday life for an operator. And although operators have been able to take this kind of volatility in the past, I'm not too sure that they will in the future. So that's why it's really important to create a predictable market environment for operators. Another thing, especially now that we're here on a Vianova webinar, we need to understand what do they actually think about our geofencing. And in understanding that, it's useful to understand how they themselves use geofencing. And they use it more like a hammer than a scalpel. So because GPS is so imprecise, operators, they use it to kind of solve like bigger areas, like put a small slow zone inside a cemetery, for example, so that users won't ride through the cemetery, but keep it small so that people riding in the areas around won't be affected who are riding on legal roads. And just to kind of give an anecdotal experience here, when I just a year ago, when I was riding a specific route on a car street, I was riding and I had cars behind me, and I was riding through a walking street. And this operator had applied with a slow zone in the walking street, and it was like, I think it was 50 meters away from me, but every time I was in that car road, it would always punch in and I would be forced to go into 6 kilometers per hour in a busy car street. So it's just one kind of piece of anecdotal evidence that shows that we need to be a bit careful in choosing how we geofence our cities. And cities give operators different kinds of operational tasks, like remove these vehicles, please now shut down for winter, for example. And operators, they're not afraid of touching their vehicles. They need to do operations on their vehicles. They need to keep them charged. They need to keep them properly rebalanced. They want to keep the cityscape tidy, believe it or not. They want to keep their vehicles safe as possible. However, if you there's kind of a rule of thumb: don't overdo it. There's an old saying: the customer is always right, but only up till to $20. So in this case, I think we can kind of apply that and say, yeah, you can say clean up this area. It's very messy. It has a lot of tipped scooters, and then the person sends out an operational personnel for 2 to 3 hours to just clean up an area. But there's a difference between that than kind of saying, hey, please pull in your fleet, please take out your fleet, please take in. Like, there's some extremes that we need to just be a bit careful of, knowing that these things are very costly for operators and require a lot of man hours. So what do I want you to remember from this brief keynote? I've just mentioned a few examples of how we can understand the underlying drivers that inform us of how these operators think. And basically, it's all about them needing to be profitable and them also wanting to win markets. And this was probably more true before, that you had a lot of different policy advice, but there's still a lot of deciphering that needs to be done in terms of like what are actually the cases of an effect of a policy. But I hope I've given you some evidence that you can think about and that can cause you to reflect and want to find out more about which effect regulations have on operators, and basically what kind of offering that we get when we regulate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars. And thanks for addressing such a crucial topic. So kind of without attentive listening, the landscape for operators may face some challenges. So really important points you brought up. And finally, time for my colleague Marcus. Could you please tell us about the work you're doing in Berlin alongside BVG, please? The floor is yours, Marcus.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Marcus, and I'm responsible for the work of Vianova in the DACH region, namely like Germany, Austria, and Swiss. And today we take a closer look, if my computer lets me, into first the milestones of shared mobility in Germany, or also particularly in Berlin. So what we first saw in around 2017 was that a lot of different bike sharing companies, OFO, Mobike, O-Bike, and so forth, were from one day to another flooding cities across Germany with an unpredictable amount of bikes. And back then, that caused some troubles like cluttered sidewalks, but also created some uncertainties, such as what is actually going on, which players do we have, how many devices do we have on the street, and what's happening next. And then in Germany, in the beginning, we had a situation where the regulation did not allow e-scooters to operate in the cities, but the German government then opened the market for scooters without giving cities additional regulatory tools to translate the learnings from previous bike sharing experiences into better regulation for the new mode of transport. And in result, the challenges with e-scooters were about the same that we already knew from bike sharing, like cluttered sidewalks, and also like high uncertainty about what was even going on. And now in 2023, we have a kind of a strange situation, particularly in Paris, where the city decided that they are no longer capable or willing to tolerate e-scooters within the city, but at the same time, they decided that they want to allow Volocopter to operate in the next year for the 2024 Olympic Games. And what I would want us to take away from here is that mobility or new mobility is a persistent process, and cities need to collaborate with the operators and also learn from previous modes of transport for future modes of transport. Then in Germany, we have a particular regulatory landscape, and I think, Lars, you mentioned already that regulations have consequences for the business of operators on a per city level. But what is also important is that each city having a different set of regulations also creates additional operational cost. And in Germany, we have exactly this situation. We have a highly localized regulatory framework. So each city has their own legal basis for regulating scooters, and each city has their own regulations for e-scooters. However, what turns out to become common sense is that in cluttered city centers, cities are focusing more and more on a system without free-floating and with station-based e-scooter sharing. And that, as a main learning, shifts the responsibilities for the management of shared mobility away from being only a city responsibility to being a responsibility at the intersection of public transport on the one hand and the city on the other hand. And so that shall be the basis for now looking into the collaboration that Vianova is doing in Berlin with both the Berlin government, but also Transport for Berlin, BVG. So let's look into the transformation that we're doing all together in Berlin. So like formerly, BVG, Transport for Berlin, was tasked by the Berlin government to create mandatory parking zones in the city center. Why was BVG tasked to do this? It was because they already had deployed multi-model hubs in prominent locations across the city. So they had the expertise and the process within their organization to build mobility hubs, and the Berlin government decided it would be good to give the responsibility for further hub creation to BVG. And when they wanted to start shifting away from free float mobility to station-based mobility, they first needed to define where do we even want to start. And obviously, we start where we have the highest parking pressure. So that is the area around Brandenburger Gate, very much city center, where we had the highest amount of parked devices. But then we wanted to have an approach that is also understandable for the customers of shared micromobility. So we would first install mobility hubs in the area which is most densely populated, but then also install 100-meter no parking zones around these hubs, so that the user would then understand that I need to park devices on mobility hubs. And so they were expanding the network into the region, and only once the network was dense enough, they would shift completely from free float to station-based parking. So it would not only create tidy curbsides beginning where it's most urgent, but it would also look at what is the need of travelers using shared mobility when it comes to the transformation from free float to station-based shared mobility. Another thing that I think is really important when planning mobility hubs is that we account for the right dimension of the mobility hub. So when you would plan a mobility hub exclusively based on average values, so like on average we have X amount of vehicles in this area, you might overlook that some peaks might be systematic. So like, let's look at the poolside in a certain summer season, or let's look at commuter train stations during commuter times, and so forth. So using our platform, it became quite easy to determine what are the peaks and which of them are systematic, because you want to create public order. So the hub does not need to only pick up the average number of vehicles, but it needs to pick up the systematic peaks of vehicles. So it creates what you were originally intending. And then one additional aspect, if you're putting up a mobility hub, and you see one prominent example here in Berlin-Schöneberg, where you have the branding and you have a lot of vehicles, but as a matter of fact, not everyone will like this. So you could also plant trees there, you could create car parking there or whatsoever. So if you create such a prominent infrastructure, people will ask you, why are you doing this? Or that puts you into the responsibility to document frequently. How well is this infrastructure used? How many trips are starting and ending here? What is the impact on the experience of the users? What's the impact on the demand for the operators, and so forth? And using the data from the connected vehicles, we're quite easily capable to provide not only the mobility manager who is taking care of the hub, but also the wider political level who would like to stand in front of this mobility hub and say, hey, this is what we created and this is the exact impact of it. So we can provide different reports and different visualizations for the different stakeholder groups that you have in this process. And one final aspect, and I think, Lars, it refers also to one aspect that you mentioned before, is if you implement regulations, what is very, very important is that you have a consistent way of communicating it, and that you have an efficient way of implementing it. So Vianova consumes the different regulations from the city and makes it accessible via a public endpoint. So it becomes easy to integrate it, but it makes it also intuitive to understand what regulation is to be interpreted in what exact way, because as a matter of fact, some information easily gets lost along the process. So we really implement procedures to make sure that the regulation implemented on the operator's side is the regulation as it was intended by the city in the first place. And maybe two essential learnings that I would like us to take away from this presentation. So first, the sharing operators, the scooter companies, they were the first movers when it came to data sharing. So they were quite openly saying, for the cities where we operate, we're sharing the data to the regulators. So, and in this way, they created a culture of data-driven mobility management and looking into, for example, maximum fleet sizes or no parking zones. The monitoring of these regulations would not be possible without the systematic use of connected vehicles data. However, this culture can now also be used and transferred into new use cases, such as like road safety or logistics. So we start with regulating shared mobility and we create a culture of trusting data from vehicles to understand our problem and understand relevant measures, and we're translating it into new use cases such as road safety and logistics. And the other aspect, which I think is also very, very important, is that infrastructure needs to be created for new modes of transport to function properly. And what I would want us to take away here as well is that a mobility hub shall not be seen only as a regulatory instrument to make sure that e-scooters are tidily parked in the public ground, but it is a reliable piece of infrastructure for people to come to and find new modes of transport. So in that way, it is the car showroom for new and sustainable modes of transport, and not only like a regulatory instrument addressing problems with shared e-scooters. So that would be it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcus. That was very insightful. And yes, to make it exciting here, we had to change room a little bit. That's what happens when you work in WeWork. So we have a few minutes left here for a Q&A, and I have some interesting questions coming in from people. And maybe we could start with Lars. Can I ask you, what do you think about what kind of collaboration is needed between cities and operators to create more successful mobility regulations moving forward? Touching upon your subject a bit that you discussed before.
I think a key issue is trust. I think a huge issue is trust, because the more there's been kind of a notion before among the operators that I don't show, for example, which is quite natural, to be honest. I don't show my books to the municipality, which is to some degrees fair, but when you have this shifting regulatory environment where you have like a lot of regulations coming in to test how can we make this service better for all kinds of road users, then you start to come into an interesting landscape where you actually need to build more trust with the city. Yeah, that's what I usually recommend, like especially when operators say that municipalities are considering doing these crazy fees or what have you, open up your books. But also I think it's the challenge is also for then the municipalities when operators aren't doing that. What do I actually then do, and how do I communicate this to my politicians that have commissioned my work, so that we can get the best possible regulations? And there's no like easy answer to that, but basically I think like finding ways of trusting each other even more is the answer.
Sounds good. We're going to take that away from here, trust. Marcus, I have a question for you. What kind of collaboration is needed between the operators and the public transport systems?
Yes. I think it's a good question, and like what we see quite commonly is that the public transport operator creates mobility hubs more from the aspect of enabling their customers to more multimodal traveling, while the intention of the city is more to regulate shared mobility in such a way that the city is tidy and also safe for all different kind of stakeholder groups. But in effect, when we put both parties on the same side, so like the public transport operator and the city, we will then be able to leverage the full potential, but also solve the challenges. So I think that is what we see with Berlin and BVG, so that we provide you access to the dashboard, we provide you comprehensive and comparable numbers, and we provide you also with a similar way of interacting with a platform. And then you actually leverage the synergies on the city and also communication side. However, on the other side, the BVG team wants to communicate mobility hubs for multi-modal traveling purposes, and the city wants to create like no parking zones and mandatory parking hubs and so forth. But having one platform at the center of both also enables both parties to communicate their regulations in a consistent way, which we are, for example, also deploying not only in Berlin, but also with one of our regional partners, VRN Transport Association, which is covering a full region and rolling out our solution to the underlying cities and organizations, where it's really even more important that the umbrella host in the center, who is overlooking the full region with multiple cities, has comparable numbers for the whole region, but also each city has a consistent way of sending out regulations to the sharing operators. So like even on a over regional level, it becomes even more useful to deploy a solution like Vianova.
Thank you. And then maybe to leave it on a positive note, because we always discuss the things that are not working really well. And let's see, are there any regulations or initiatives upcoming? I'm putting this question to all three of you. Is there anything that innovations or initiatives regarding regulations around micromobility or shared mobility that you are excited about? No one is.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm a bit of a simple soul. So I usually like it when we find out that regulations aren't needed. I hear about several municipalities that are reducing certain regulations while keeping some. So when a city finds out that they want to increase their cap, for example, or do other measures to better the mobility in a city, for example, I think that's really positive. But also, I mean, I love parking fines because I think that's basically the answer. I don't believe necessarily forced parking is. I don't like forced parking, just to be completely honest. And that's because it just makes the mobility worse. So you can't really get to where you're going. I mean, it's good in the sense that you know where to find a vehicle, but the user experience is very poor. And yeah, both on having to, like, if you're in an urban canyon and the GPS says that you're 50 meters over there, but you're actually at the parking hub, and then yeah, it's quite a crappy user experience on the kind of technical side, and on also having to walk 100, 200 meters to your final destination. It's when you have not that much time. So I think parking fines are the answer to how we can kind of keep free floating in cities and keep the mobility service up.
Sounds good. Anyone else has something they want to add for that last question?
Just maybe, Lars, since you brought it up, like the concern that you just raised are very much at the core of the effort on BVG and the city side, because they are aware that you basically destroy the value of a free flow shared mobility solution if you make it station-based parked. But you can enable the best of both worlds by having a dense enough network of parking hubs. So like, we're talking more about 50 meters. And that's actually the clear intention, is not only to make it station-based, but also make it the network dense enough to maintain the value of a last mile mobility solution. So I think both works together quite well.
Yeah, and I think I don't have like I think sometimes cities find themselves that they need to implement a forced parking scheme, especially in certain areas, and I mean, I can't put myself in their shoes, but I think that generally to have kind of allocated painted parking hubs is really good, as also BVG has done, because research has shown that better makes parking better. And generally, I think, yeah, I think perceived parking quality, what research has shown so far is that forced parking does actually make it slightly tighter, but the jury is still a bit out. So everything is not said and done yet. And the car, we have to remember that also the car is to a certain extent mandatory parking, to a certain extent free floating. If we want to have a service that competes with the car, we need to have that in mind. But yeah, I think it sounds like a really interesting thing that BVG has done. So it wasn't anything to. It's just that there are several nuances to the subject.
It's true. Well, thanks everyone. I think we have reached the end of this webinar. So
there's a question.
Oh, let's see if we have time. Okay, let's answer it quickly. Can you see it, Lars?
We will likely experience a transitional period when we eliminate city center parking for cars, that is, and not necessarily decreasing the number of vehicles as much as required. How do we handle the pushing of parking demand outside city centers? And I think, yeah, I don't know if anyone is, because I think this is about car parking and cars. and it sounds like handling kind of municipal complaints, maybe. I don't feel quite competent to handle that question. Is there anyone?
Yeah, maybe we can build a whole new webinar for that question or that topic and bringing experts that actually can, yeah, that gave us an idea for follow-up for what we are doing here. Yeah, so thank you everyone. Thank you to the speakers, Lars, Jakob, Marcus, for sharing your expertise today. And thank you for our attentive audience, for your active participation and really engaging questions. We're gonna have to have another one now just so we can address that topic as well. And on behalf of the whole webinar team, thank you for joining today. And until next time, take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.